Hi guys, in this video I want to introduce you to a very important topic of the endgame, which is fortresses. Fortresses are positions where the weaker side, despite being material down and sometimes even being a lot of material down, is able to hold on to a draw and defend successfully. And that's why I think it's very important to know a few basic fortresses so that you can quickly evaluate them and find a way to reach them in a practical game. The more you know, the better you will become in the end game, and you will find some ways and apply some of the fortresses in your own games. So the way I'm gonna present this to you is I will show you 4 positions, out of which you will get 4 fortress ideas. However, not all of the 4 starting positions are fortresses, because I think it might be quite boring for the viewer, as they have no way to think about the positions and figure out if they are a fortress or not. So that's why I chose to present you 4 positions, out of which 2 positions only will be a fortress, and the other 2 ones are close but not quite a fortress yet. So you need to figure out this on your own, and I will give you some time to think about each of the positions on your own so that you can decide if you think this is a fortress or not. And if you want to think about the first position, it's right to move here. You can pause the video and you can try to make your evaluation, and we will then continue figuring out if it's a fortress or not. So let's start. The right answer for this one here is it's not a fortress. White is actually having this pawn combined with this bishop, which might make you think that this is a fortress, because this is called the wrong bishop. It's not controlling the dark squares, and the dark squares are important because this is the queening square. This is in general true, and if white was forced to play h7, the position would indeed become a fortress after king g7, as we cannot really approach our king because finally black would get stalemated, and we also have no way to make meaningful progress and to force the king out of the corner. So black is basically just waiting between those 2 squares, and that's enough for him to hold the draw. So let's see why it's not a fortress if this would be a fortress. What should white do instead then? And the key move is bishop to h7, with the idea that we forbid the black king to reach the corner. And this is the key idea. If the black king is not allowed to reach the corner, we will be able to advance our king and finally push his king back by means of Zugzwang, and we will see how it works. And if the king needs to go away and our king reaches the g7 square, then position is winning, because all the pawn squares for our pawn are controlled, and we will just remove the bishop again and then move the pawn. So let's see step by step. Black might try king f6, threatening king g5, winning our pawn, and we should not go back with the bishop because he can repeat the moves, threatening to go back to the corner, and that's not what we want. Instead, we are lucky that we can play king f4, also defending this threat, and now the black king is kind of cut off in all directions. He cannot come closer to the pawn. He needs to step back, and in one way or another we will step by step improve our king, and he needs to go back further, and finally after some oppositions we will reach the g7 square, and then the king controls the key squares. We will move the bishop and win the game. So what you should remember from this position is this is close to a fortress, but it's not yet one. If the black king reaches the corner, it's a fortress, that's true. But if white manages to keep the king out of the corner and make progress with the king to g7, then white is actually winning. So this was number 1. So here we are starting with the second example. In this position it's white to move again, and if you want to think on your own, stop the video and try to make your decision, is it a fortress or not? And we will continue with the solution right now. The correct answer is yes, this one is a fortress. White has a protected pass pawn which looks quite powerful, but white is not able to make any progress, and the reason for this is that all this is so far advanced that it's very close to the edges of the board, very close to the 8th rank and very close to the A line also, and there will be enough stalemating ideas so that we can never push our pawn and also never win the A6 pawn. Let's see how black is defending here. So the most natural try for white is to proceed with the king, and black should be careful here a little bit, I think, to choose the correct square, but I think actually it might not matter. I think black should just play king to b8. If white goes king c6, he has the opposition, and after b7 check, this would be a typical stalemate. So maybe white could try something else. White can wait, for example, and try to triangulate black so that we will change the right to move, and then the opposition is maybe won by white, but we will see that this does not change the evaluation of the position. Black should just return to b7, and white goes all the way up. Black is going back again, and white might triangulate again, king b7, king d7, and after king b8, it's not even that easy to reach this triangulation, as after king c6 we still have the same as before, and maybe it's not even possible at all. So there is no progress here, and I think that's basically it. White cannot make a progress. Black could even play king a8 here, as after b7 check king a7, king c7 would still be at stalemate, and it's due to this pawn on a6 which limits the black king, and also due to this pawn. So there are no winning chances. Black can even hold in several ways. I'm sure this is holding, but also king a8 is holding. The last detail is also king c7 just leads to a draw, and this is all caused by how close those pawns are to the edge. So remember, this is one of the very rare occasions where a protected pass pawn does not win the game. And for example, if we switch it back by one line, then white would be indeed winning because there are not so many stalemating ideas. But in this case it's different, and white cannot make progress. So this is exercise number 3. Again, white to move, and you can think about it. Is this a fortress, or can black break through? So take your time and we will continue with the solution, which is, yes, this is a fortress. White can defend the position and not letting black through, and if you're familiar with it, it might seem quite simple. White is actually just waiting with the rook, and black has no way to pass the third rank with his king, because the rook will always stay there. So this king cannot come closer, so he can also not attack this pawn twice, because the king will not make it through. And the queen on her own can also not make any big progress. Our king will stay very close to the pawn. There is no chance to ever be forced away. And if we don't want to move the king because it's already perfect, protecting the pawn, then we just move the rook again, and black cannot come through. And there are also no sacrifices, because if he sacks the queen for pawn and rook, then there's just no material left. So that's already it for this position. And finally we come to position number 4. This time it's black to move, and it's up to you to decide, is this a fortress, or will white finally break through? And we continue with the solution, and it's indeed a fortress, but only if black finds the correct idea, and the correct idea is to play king to g6, forcing the pawn to move one step further, because otherwise it is just lost, because it's undefended. Knight f7, There's also no way, we just take it and we can safely return. So there is no way for white to keep the pawn except h7. And after this, since we provoked the pawn to h7, we will just see this defensive plan with waiting with the king again. There is no way white can make progress, because if his king comes too close, it will be a stalemate. Let me show you this. So king h8, he cannot move the knight because then the pawn would be lost. And if he comes closer with the king, and if he's waiting, and if he's then approaching in any way, it's already stalemate. And he cannot move the knight first, because then the pawn would drop again. So this is a fortress. So if you were thinking about alternatives, they don't work, because after king g8, white will not be forced to play h7, which would blunder it all away to a fortress, but white can instead approach the king, and black can just wait passively. But white is not yet in danger of stalemating, and he will play the attacking moves with check, and finally the h-pawn will queen, and white is winning. So be careful here. It's very crucial that we provoke the pawn to the 7th rank. Only then the position becomes a fortress and black draws this. So I hope you enjoyed the positions and you learned something from them. If so, please subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.